Hey there, Mr. Mysterious Night Shift Warriors. Experience something creepy during your night shifts? Share your story with us. Send your written stories or clear audio recordings, no background noise, to the email address mentioned in the description below. Your support is my fuel. So, please like, subscribe, and comment where, when, and with whom you listen to these stories. It motivates me to create more spooky content. Now, settle into your shift, stay vigilant, and let the next story keep you entertained through the night. While bartending at an old dive bar in Minneapolis, I experienced my most intense ghost encounter yet. It was around 10:30 p.m. earlier this year, and I was closing down the bar. All of the doors were locked, and everyone had left for the night, so I was completely alone in the building. To set the scene, this restaurant has a long bar, and at the end of it is a short hallway. If you take a right, there is a stairway that leads to the creepy basement. If you continue down the hallway going straight, it leads into the kitchen. The bar itself had only one entrance to get behind it, and it was down at the end, closer to the kitchen and stairs. The bar had an old, rustic charm to it. The wooden floors creaked with every step, and the dim lighting gave it a cozy yet eerie atmosphere, especially late at night. There were old pictures and memorabilia from the bar's early days decorating the walls, adding to its historical feel. I always loved that about the place. It had character. However, that night, the bar's charm felt more sinister than inviting. I was behind the bar, making a Spotify cue to begin closing the bar to, and the music was currently quiet enough that I could hear something in the kitchen turn on that wasn't on a second before. At first, I thought that the kitchen staff had snuck back in when I wasn't looking. I turned the corner out of the bar and went back into the kitchen. When I flipped the lights on, I saw that our large dish sink against the opposite wall had been turned on, and cold water was running. This was peculiar since the handle was turned and the sink wasn't on a minute before. I looked around the kitchen, turned the sink back off, flipped the light switch off, and returned behind the bar to continue closing. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the faucet had a loose handle and it turned on by itself, but I knew that didn't make much sense. The handle had to be turned deliberately for the water to come on. I shook off the uneasy feeling and continued with my closing duties, trying to distract myself with mundane tasks like wiping down the counters and putting away the glasses. About 30 seconds to a minute later, I heard the water come back on. This time, my heart raced. I went back into the dark kitchen, and as I approached, I could see the water was gushing from the hand-washing sink right next to the previously mentioned dish sink. The cold water tap was turned on fully at a 90-degree angle. I frantically searched the kitchen, opening cabinets and even looking under the prep tables, assuming someone was playing a prank on me. But the kitchen was empty. After I realized no one was there, I announced out loud, "Do not do that again." My voice echoed in the empty kitchen, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. The air felt heavy, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I was genuinely scared. I was so spooked, I called a friend and searched the entire building with a chef's knife. Room by room, I checked the basement, storage closets, and even the bathrooms. Each creak and groan of the old building amplified my anxiety, but the search turned up nothing. I was completely alone. I returned to the bar, knife still in hand, and called my friend again, explaining what had happened. They tried to reassure me, suggesting that maybe it was just a plumbing issue or my imagination playing tricks on me. But I knew what I saw. Somehow, I managed to finish closing the bar, all while feeling like I was being watched. Every sound seemed amplified in the empty bar. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, even the faint buzz of the neon sign outside. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something standing there. A few other things have happened since then, on a much smaller scale. Sometimes, I hear footsteps when no one is there, or I find objects moved from where I left them. Once, I heard whispering coming from the basement, but when I checked, it was empty. Each incident leaves me feeling uneasy, but nothing has been as intense as that night with the faucets. I've talked to a few regulars and other staff about my experiences. Some have shared their own eerie encounters, while others just laugh it off. The bar has been around for decades, and it's no secret that old buildings can have their quirks. Still, I can't shake the feeling that there's something more to it. Working at the bar is still something I enjoy, but I'm always a bit on edge, especially when closing alone. I've learned to live with the odd occurrences, but that night remains etched in my memory as the most terrifying experience I've ever had. So this happened about 6 years ago when I was 20 years old, working my first job at a restaurant as a dishwasher and busboy. It was a Saturday night, and the restaurant had just closed. On the weekends, a coworker and I would stay after hours to clean up the restrooms, kitchen, dining area, and so on. My coworker was in the kitchen, cleaning up the dishes. Instead of helping him, I decided to get a head start on cleaning up the dining area. I put up all the chairs and began to sweep. As I was sweeping, I was listening to my music and moving the tables and sweeping the rugs like I always did. However, I started to feel uneasy, as if someone were watching me. I tried to ignore the feeling and keep working, but it just wouldn't go away. There were 2 tables across from each other at the end of the hall. One table was next to the window facing the boulevard, and the other was near the restrooms, which was table 28. Once I got into a clear view of table 28, things started to get a lot creepier. Out of the corner of my eye, I would see a figure, like a man peeking at me. Whenever I turned to look directly at the table, it seemed like the figure would quickly hide back into the booth. At this point, I was scared out of my mind. I began to sweat and felt an overwhelming sense of dread that I can't even describe. Despite this, I decided to thug it out and continue cleaning up. I guess the spirit, or whatever you want to call it, didn't like that I chose to ignore it. It decided to really make its presence known. Each table in the restaurant had a service button that customers could push to get the attention of the waitstaff. As I was getting closer to table 28, I heard the familiar sound of the service bell. I immediately ran to the cashier's table, where you could see which table was requesting service on a small screen above where the host or hostess would stand. Sure enough, it was table 28. I decided to let my coworker know about what was going on. He was still in the back, cleaning up the kitchen with both headphones on. He saw me come to the back and asked if I had finished. I told him what had happened, and he didn't believe me at first. He even laughed at me. Then I told him to get quiet, and he did. We both heard the service bell going off again. We went to check which table it was, and again, It was table 28. This time, his face changed from laughter to fear as he saw that I was telling the truth. My coworker decided that we should just leave and tell the owner and manager what had happened. I agreed, and we left. The owner laughed and said it was fine. We ended up finishing the cleanup the next morning before we opened. Before this experience, the owner would always joke, asking if we had a visit from the ghost yet. I didn't believe him, thinking he was just messing with us. But it turns out that before the restaurant, the property had been a retirement home where several elderly people had passed away. I guess the spirits of the elderly would often pay a visit. After that, things went back to normal, but it remains by far the scariest thing I have ever experienced. I still get chills when I share the story. My best friend and I have a long-standing tradition of going out to eat after school. It started back in middle school when we were finally allowed to go to places on our own. We'd talk about everything: his family's quirky antics, our school crushes, the latest drama among our friends. These outings were a special time for us to unwind and connect. Last year, a new cafe opened just down the street from our school. It had a charming, cozy atmosphere with warm lighting, rustic furniture, and the inviting aroma of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods. We were excited to try it out and made plans to meet there after school one Friday. As we walked in, the place was bustling with activity. The chatter of other customers, the clinking of dishes, and the hiss of the espresso machine created a lively backdrop. Despite the cheerful environment, I felt a strange sense of unease. It was as if someone was watching us, but I brushed it off, thinking I was just tired from a long week at school. We found a table near the window and sat down. My friend seemed a bit on edge too, shifting in his seat and glancing around. As we started to chat, he suddenly stiffened and gestured subtly toward a corner of the cafe. There, sitting alone, was an elderly woman. Her gaze was fixed on us, her eyes unblinking. When our eyes met, she abruptly turned away and disappeared into the crowd. "Did you see that?" my friend whispered, his voice shaky. "Yeah, that was weird," I replied, trying to shake off the discomfort. We joked nervously about being paranoid, attributing it to our overactive imaginations. However, over the next few weeks, we kept seeing her. At first, it was always at the cafe. She would be sitting alone, watching us intently. Then, we started spotting her in other places we frequented: McDonald's, KFC, the local park. Each time, she would vanish as soon as we noticed her, leaving us with a growing sense of unease. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was just a lonely old woman who happened to frequent the same spots as us. But it was hard to ignore the feeling that something wasn't right. One evening, after a particularly stressful day at school, we decided to unwind at a nearby Burger King. We were relieved not to see her there and finally began to relax. As we enjoyed our meal and laughed about old times, my friend suddenly went pale. "Look up," he whispered. I glanced up at the ceiling and froze. In the ventilation shaft above us, a pair of eyes were staring down. They were cold and unblinking, watching our every move. We quickly gathered our things and left, our nerves on edge. The next few days were tense. We avoided our usual hangouts, sticking to places that felt safer. But the feeling of being watched never completely left us. We couldn't help but glance over our shoulders, our nerves frayed. Weeks passed without any further incidents, and we slowly began to relax. Life started to feel normal again. We returned to our favorite spots, cautiously optimistic that the strange occurrences were behind us. Then, one evening, I was at home alone, catching up on homework. My phone buzzed with a message from my friend. "She's back. Just saw her outside my house." My heart raced as I looked out my own window, half expecting to see her there. The street was empty, but the uneasy feeling remained. I knew then that she hadn't stopped watching us. She had just become better at hiding. Now, every creak in the house, every shadow outside, fills me with dread. I'm always on edge, waiting for those cold, unblinking eyes to appear again. It's a nightmare that we can't seem to escape, a reminder that some things can't be easily explained or ignored.